Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. I am excited today because I get to talk to Dr. Mona Delahooke. She is a psychologist who has written a book, actually written several books, and her newest one is called The Brain Body Parenting: How to Stop Managing Behavior and Start Raising Joyful, Resilient Kids. And this title just speaks to me because as a pediatrician, I have a lot of parents that come in with specific behavioral issues that they want fixed, and they're very nuanced and specific to the child. And what I try and do is teach them how to stop managing specific behaviors and look at the overall child. So could you give us a little bit of background of what made you decide to write this specific book and who it's really for?
Of course. And thank you so much for having me on. And I love what you just said about kind of trying to help parents take a little bit of a larger view of behaviors, because that's exactly what I've been interested in for my clinical practice. And I wrote about the importance of looking beyond behaviors in a book that I wrote several years ago. And what that really means is, I think that as a kind of as a culture, and certainly in our education system and even in mental health, we have behaviors as kind of the target of our concerns and of our interventions. But really, behaviors are a signal. They're valuable signals of what's going on a deeper level for a child, right? And one of those signals is of how the child's nervous system is doing, what
Hmm.
their stress response system is like. So I like to tell parents that they don't need to be as worried or fearful of behaviors, but we can look at them as providing such useful information about what that child needs on a deeper level.
I think that the analogy that sticks with me right now as you are saying all of that is like symptoms versus the actual illness. They may have a cough, or they may have a fever, or they may have a rash, but those aren't actual diagnoses of what's wrong with the child. Those are symptoms that are going on, which speaks to some underlying illness that is causing those kind of symptoms to come to the surface. And it sounds like from what you're saying that those behaviors are a signal that of an underlying issue that's needs to be addressed.
I love that analogy. It absolutely works. Let's take an example. A child who is asking over and over and over again, Mommy, do I have school tomorrow? Mommy, do I have school tomorrow? Daddy, do I have school tomorrow? Okay, so they're asking question over and over again. That's the behavior. But what might be, so the symptom, but what might be underlying that behavior as the motivation or the cause? Well, the child may be really worried. Their little nervous system may be in what we call the red pathway. Their mind is racing, and they're concerned, and they're worried about going to school and maybe being separated from you. So yes, we look to the symptom for the answers, not as our target of like trying to just have the child stop saying it.
Right. So instead of just yes, school's tomorrow, how would you approach if you were the parent and you're seeing those signals from your child that they seem to be nervous or excited or that something's going on in them? I know that in a recent blog post you talked about being more curious, and so how would you specifically address that if you were the parent in that circumstance?
So I have two, I like little acronyms. So I have two acronyms that I use. The first one is called the SO, standing for stop and observe. So just momentarily, just take a second to stop. Like, okay, they're asking this question and they're asking it a lot, and their voice seems to be kind of tense. That allows you to observe. So you just say, okay, and this can take seconds, like, interesting, stop and observe. And then we do the RR, resonate and respond. What might that look like? That might be looking like, first of all, we resonate, which means we kind of use the tone of our voice and the look on our face to help the child feel witnessed or listened to. So I might say something like, oh my goodness, you've asked me about school now a few times. Hey. So that's resonating. So you're just
Okay.
letting the child be seen. And then we respond after the resonating, we respond, huh. And of course, this is what I'm going to say next. Let's just say generically the child is school age, but it has to be according to your child's developmental age. So you'd say something different to a toddler than you would to a school age person. But what you'd be saying is something like, I wonder, do you have any thoughts about school you'd like to share with me?
Hmm.
Or something like that. You just open the door.
I
And
see.
the way you open the door is by being really kind of neutral about it and not anxious yourself. Because, and again, I like no blame, no shame. I was a very like overprotective parent. So I might have, when my children were very young, I didn't have these tools and techniques. I might have said, well, yes, there's school, but what's wrong? Why are you asking me so many times?
Right.
But what we want to do is just be neutral and sturdy and just find out. Be curious. Be
I see.
curious. Yeah.
I really like that approach because, and the word curious just makes it easy to think about, like, what could that mean to a parent? Well, it means to kind of be willing to hear what your child is saying, even if it's not what you're expecting. Maybe they're worried because they have a test tomorrow, or maybe they're worried because a friend of theirs was sick and they're not sure if they're going to be at school, or if, there could be a lot of different things
Oh, that's
that
so
that
right.
could be on the child's mind.
Maybe it's a substitute teacher and that they've had before and they didn't really feel very emotionally safe with them. You're right. There's so many. That's where curiosity really is our ally, because we can learn from the child.
I think parents' instinct is to quell the questioning and stop the, perceived anxiety that the child is having, saying, don't worry, or, it's no big deal. You went to school today, something like that. But it sounds
Yeah.
like what you're saying is just, rather than try and solve their problem, is just to make them feel heard and understood.
Yes. And again, with heartfelt understanding to parents who want to help their children feel better right away. Of course, we all want that. But if a child hears that soothing and explanation of why they shouldn't feel that way, sometimes they actually feel a little bit even more anxious. So yeah,
Sure.
it's just nice to be able to give them that breathing room for them to feel witnessed with that.
Now, I really like book titles, and I'm always thinking about book titles. And you named yours Brain Body Parenting. So explain to me what brain body parenting means.
Mm-hmm. I think that what I wanted to do in this book is introduce the idea that we really are parenting more than our children's behaviors. And because I've been very interested in the autonomic nervous system, I've studied something called the polyvagal theory, and it's just a kind of a way of understanding how one of our nervous systems evolved. But it's very useful because it connects the brain and the body. So we're not just a brain and we're not just a body. We're always both. And our bodies are always informing our brains of what's going on inside of our viscera, our tummies, our gut, everywhere, and also through our sense organs. So our bodies are feeding up those afferent pathways, right? Feeding information to the brain, and then the brain's making sense of it. So I'm suggesting that our best parenting happens not when we're focusing on behaviors, but when we're focusing on nervous systems, when we're focusing on the whole body and the brain. And that's why we decided to call it brain body parenting, in that we tend to think about, once our children can speak, to just talk to them, right? Use logic and which is wonderful, but reasoning, logic, positive parenting, a lot of great books have been written on that. But I think this is the first book that is translating some neuroscience from people like Lisa Feldman Barrett and Dr. Stephen Porges into parenting. And I really think our parenting can benefit, because then we're not taking our children's behaviors as personally as we sometimes do, but also, most importantly, it puts our nervous system into the mix, because we matter as parents our ability to stay calm with our children, because we know about something called emotional contagion, is that our emotions are contagious. They've done studies
Oh,
on
for
that.
sure.
And that shouldn't, I don't want parents to have that be like, oh no, another thing to worry about, like a burden, but more of something that can free us, to allow us to understand that we have to make sure we're okay in order to help a child who's out of control. So brain body is really talking about customizing our interactions to our child's nervous system, so we don't have to worry if a common parenting script or what someone tells us to do is gonna for sure help our child in a certain situation, because we all know it's not that easy. Parenting isn't as
Right.
easy as giving the right words to your child.
I think that's one of the things that parents often, like I was saying at the beginning, turn to their pediatrician for, is like, fix this specific thing that they're doing. They always throw their food at the table, or they have a tantrum when I don't let them watch more Frozen, and fix this. And it's very specific situation. And I try and instead, teach them strategies that work, not just like this week when Frozen is the issue, or next week when, not getting their ice cream is the issue, but here's some strategies that you can employ for their childhood, their adolescence, their adult life, and everything like that, to connect them and make them feel supported and understood. And then it's more broadly applicable. So it's not just this very specific scenario where this strategy works really well, or this punishment works really well, or that sort of thing, but instead focusing on that listening component. So I guess
that, by the way, that is such a gift as a pediatrician. And thank you for that, because
I try. I'm not always perfect at it.
Well,
it's certainly evolved, and I feel bad for some of my very early patients who
right.
I wasn't in tune with those things. And and we have 6 kids at our house, so I have lots of opportunities to like practice or not.
It's really wonderful though. I want pediatricians to hear that message, because often, and I know my heart goes out to pediatricians, and I would love to be a fly on the wall on all those visits you have every day, and all the problems and concerns you hear from parents, because children are complex, but to give answers that are beyond just this one specific situation is really, really a gift. So thank you for that.
I think one thing that parents worry about, that you speak specifically in a recent blog post too, is just letting it pass when a child is having a tantrum. And you said specifically, and I'm just going to read the quote here, is, when a little human is in distress, our response as parents shouldn't be to wait it out. That is, not unless we tried all forms of warm and engaging contact and nothing else has worked. To me, that says, something that I've heard repeated many times in the past is just let it, just let them scream and cry, and they'll eventually stop. But why should we consider a different strategy when our toddlers and young children are at that moment where they're really, inconsolable, when they're screaming, when they're throwing things, instead of just letting it pass? What you say that we should try warm and engaging contact. Why should we do that? And what would that look like in contrast to just letting them screaming have their moment?
Yeah. Well, I believe that we know now that those behaviors that we might consider tantrums, especially when children are inconsolable, when they are red-faced, crying, snotty nosed, out of control. Their bodies are in out of control movements, which is what it basically describes the human fight or flight response. That in human beings, when you're in distress, you are trying to get back to the social engagement system. You're trying, your body is trying, but your body is using movement because you are not able at that moment. We can talk about the idea of the body budget that I love, Feldman Barrett's term for just how our bodies run on a budget. And sometimes there's no gas in the tank, we're overdrawn.
Mm-hmm.
And this idea that we should leave children alone when they're tantruming or they just need to somehow get it out really isn't, in my opinion, informed by what we know now. And that is that it isn't something that just wears itself out to exhaustion, but it's a sign of a human in distress, a human body that needs warmth and engagement and support. Now, and I should say, not a sign of a child who is trying to get negative attention and get their own way. And I'm really pushing back on this idea that children throw tantrums. And of course, when again, I define it on a kind of on the physiology. You can look at their bodies. So there's features across their whole bodies that'll tell you this is not a human trying to make my day miserable or get that candy before we leave Target, right? It's a human being who is not able to control their little bodies and their minds right now, so they need some help. And that help has to be customized to the child. So sometimes, of course, nothing's going to work and you make sure the child's safe, but you can always use your presence too. Oh, my sweetie, this is hard. Oh, this is a situation. But in addition to that, you can try those things that soothe your child. If you experiment with those sensory soothing strategies that maybe don't even involve words. Some children like to have a hand on the back of their head or their shoulder when they're feeling really horrible. Some don't like to be touched at all. Some might like a humming sound or a song or gentle words. And some may not. Some may want you to stand really close and give them a big bear hug. Some, again, may want you to stand a few feet away. But respecting the child's soothing strategies, which you can write down, you can notice them when the child's not in a tantrum. What helps the nervous system calm down? And then offer some support. So it's a whole new way of looking at out of control child behaviors and moving away from this idea that children just have to wear themselves out and stop crying on their own. Really, I think it reflects our culture's lack of understanding of these different systems in our body that are called stress responses.
Well, I think it also, it's harder because it takes more time. It takes patience and it takes the ability to be calm and soothing yourself in that moment when oftentimes parents do feel like they're just trying to piss me off. And so, it takes extra work, but I do find at our house and with the patients that I talk with about this, that when they can practice that, and it takes intentionality to do that, but when they do that, then their tantrums are shorter lived. Yes. Everybody moves on. We move through the phases of these different tantrums and issues that we're facing much faster. And you often then look back and think, oh my gosh, remember how we used to deal with that all the time, and now we're dealing with this, but this is different and it's not the same. So I do find that is a really good strategy, and it is helpful, and it makes you feel better as a parent too than just kind of ignoring it or blaming the child or something like that. But it is hard, and it requires the parents to take care of themselves from a sleep, from a nourishment, from a own support and connection standpoint, to be equipped to do that well for their child.
100%. It's not only, it's good for our physical bodies and for our own personal health, but you're right, it does take patience. And if when you've got a lot going on at the house, a lot of different varying needs and a lot of children in different states of what they need from you, it can be impossible. So it's okay if you do lose it, we can always repair. So it's almost like the repair is so important too, that if you do like overstep or forget that, oh yeah, last time I distracted in this really wonderful way and the tantrum turned around on a dime and the child started feeling better. This is really, oh, it's so of the heart, and it is exhausting, especially if you have toddlers and a lot of different developmental stages with your children. It's really hard, but I love that you are, again, seeing that it does shorten tantrums when you pay attention to the child rather than just kind of either ignore it or write it off as, oh, this is the terrible twos, I might as well just throw my hat in. I'm so glad that you are helping parents understand that there's more to it.
So my guess is that things that you would say would be that timeouts would not be something in your tool belt to frequently go to when your child is acting out.
Yes, and for the exact reason that we were talking about. Generally, timeouts are used when the behaviors get to a certain point that the child is doing something what we consider egregious, and so they're out of control. And what we know is that an out of control child doesn't need to be isolated from humans. They need social engagements, because the behavior, if it was a behavior that was, kind of hitting, kicking, scratching, yelling, saying things that that are uncharacteristic of the child, running away. Those behaviors are indicators of a child who's not in control of that nuance, being able to talk their way out of it or ask you a question. And so while it's tempting to view a behavior that is something that we would typically give a timeout for as a purposeful misbehavior, what we want to understand is that there's a difference between a misbehavior and a stress behavior, a stress response. And when a child is out of control and not able to use their words or to ask you a question, and they go to those things that we typically give time out for, that can make the child feel worse. And more isolated means you feel more desperate. So we want to go in the opposite direction, actually, of the timeout. And that is, again, going to that resonating and responding. Of course, setting appropriate limits, nice firm boundaries. You keep your values as a parent. You can do that. You can make sure everyone's safe and help the child know that what behaviors are okay and not okay, but still be empathic. So it's a both and.
What would you say? I agree completely with you. I think that's the right approach too. And I have certainly in the past years de-emphasized the use of timeouts because I just don't find them to be effective for families that I work with and also in our own house. I think the reaction that a lot of parents have is that they need to make sure that the child understands the gravity of tossing the remote across the room or whatever it might be, whatever offense is, that if there isn't a punishment, then they won't learn from that, and there isn't, justice hasn't been served. So how do you respond to those kind of, ingrained feelings of justice and punishment?
Well, first of all, as a parent, I completely relate to that because, we do not want an iPad thrown across the room or a TV remote, just like that's like our kind of a nightmare situation. So I totally understand.
You can see my cracked phone here. This was not my doing.
I understand. So so I get that. And I get that we are the parents. And so we have to provide very consistent boundaries and family rules. And I'm certainly not suggesting that coddling is the way to go. But I'm trying to help us understand that we really need to understand three things about the child as we discipline and teach them what's best. Number one is the state of the body. And so if that child is in the fight or flight pathway of their nervous system, they are not going to be in control of their behaviors. And so punishing them for doing something that their body was doing rather than their intention is not going to be very successful. It's going to be confusing. B, the child's developmental abilities. So again, a toddler age, and not necessarily their chronological age, but we want to look at the child's developmental age. A toddler is going to be very different than an 8-year-old or somebody who is in that category. So toddlers are very, very, they shift back and forth, and we can't expect them to have that, what we call inhibitory control. They can't inhibit what they want to do, even if it's something wrong. So look at the platform, the child's body, their developmental stage, and finally, their individual differences. And so every child is unique in all those differences that allow them to process the information that we're giving them. So the answer to your question is figure out if what your response is to the child is customized to their nervous system, to their unique differences, and to their developmental stage. And I know that sounds complicated, but we can, in the book, I kind of lay it out on how you do each of those things. And when you do that, I think you'll find what you said, those moments that you have to worry about what sort of consequence you're going to give, they become less and less frequent. It's
Right.
really awesome.
Yeah, that is something that I've noticed too, just in our own parenting journey in our house, is the frequency of times where I'm like, oh, we should put them in timeout, and kind of reverting back to those things. It drops a lot. And then when they do act out, you're like, geez, that's kind of out of character. I wonder what's going on that would lead to that, and get curious about it, rather than, oh my gosh, she just threw the remote across the room. I've got to figure out how to take away her iPad or punish her in some way. Instead, you think, oh, well, that's kind of odd. Maybe there's something going on that caused that to happen.
I love that. There's that curiosity, because as Ross Green says, he's a psychologist. He says children do well if they can, and when they can.
Mm-hmm.
And when they can't, there's generally reason. So I love that. That's that curiosity. Like, yeah, this is out of character. Huh.
Right.
Let's look a little bit deeper.
Well, I'm super excited for your book, and I am going to make sure that in the show notes for this, all the information is so people can pre-order it. And I know if they pre-order it, they get some special goodies, some time and trainings with you, and all sorts of good things. So I would encourage them before the book is released to go and pre-order it so that they can get access to those and learn even more. But where can people find more about you, about your book, and all the information that they need to improve their parenting through your help?
Oh, thank you so much. Parents can find me on my website, monadelahooke.com, and Facebook and Instagram at Dr. Mona Delahooke, and Twitter as well. So yeah, social media.
All over the place.
All over the place. I try to post useful, helpful hints for parents every on those different platforms. But I'm just so grateful for your taking the time to talk to me about brain body parenting. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, I'm excited, and I think that these make it possible for parents to change behaviors and really, break previous habits that have been ingrained for not just the past years that they've been parents, but the kind of the intergenerational parenting that now we can kind of start to replace those previous strategies with things that are shown to work, that make you feel better as a parent, that give you some pride in your parenting. So I'm super excited about it.
That's awesome. It's more compassionate, and it's, I think, shifting the way we see development, and making the world warmer and a better place for our kids as we learn, as we go forward. So thanks again.